Guard and hear all these words which I command you, that it may go well with you, and with your children after you forever, when you do that which is good and right in the sight of Ahayah Eloheka. When Ahayah Eloheka shall cut off the nations from before you, whither you go to possess them, and you succeed them, and dwell in their land, take heed to yourself that you be not snared by following them, after that they be destroyed from before you, and that you inquire not after their Elohim, saying, How did these nations serve their Elohim? Even so will I do likewise. You shall not do so unto Ahayah Eloheka. For every abomination to Ahayah, which he hates, have they done unto their Elohim. For even their sons and their daughters they have burnt in the fire to their Elohim. What thing soever I command you, guard to do it. You shall not add thereto, nor diminish from it. DEVARIYM, Deuteronomy 12:28-32c, PHER. So let it be known, killing children, even unborn children, is a sin to Yah. Thus says Ahayah, learn not the way of the heathen, and be not dismayed at the signs of heaven, for the heathen are dismayed at them. For the customs of the people are vain. For one cuts a tree out of the forest, the work of the hands of the workmen with the axe. They deck it with silver, and with gold. They fasten it with nails and with hammers, that it move not. They are upright as the palm tree, but speak not. They must needs be born, because they cannot go. Be not afraid of them, for they cannot do evil, neither also is it in them to do good. Forasmuch as there is none like unto you, O Ahayah, you are great, and your name is great in might. Who would not fear you, O King of nations? For to you does it appertain. Forasmuch as among all the wise men of the nations, and in all their kingdoms, there is none like unto you. But they are altogether brutish and foolish. The tree is a doctrine of vanities. But they are altogether brutish and foolish. The tree is a doctrine of vanities. Silver spread into plates is brought from Tarshish, and gold from Upaz, the work of the workman, and of the hands of the founder. Blue and purple is their clothing. They are all the work of cunning men. But Ahayah is the Elohim of truth. He is the living Elohim, and the everlasting King. At his wrath the earth shall tremble, and the nations shall not be able to abide his indignation. YIRMEYAHU, Jeremiah 10:2-10, Cepher.
In the northern hemisphere during late December, the days are at their shortest lengths, and the nights are at their longest. For those of the pagan world, this has always been the greatest time of the year to celebrate and practice the works of darkness. The pagan calendar identifies this period as the winter solstice. It was during the pre-Christian midwinter pagan celebrations of Scandinavia's Norsemen where today's Christmas traditions began. As a means of honoring the pagan sex and fertility god Yule, a 12-day celebration during the month of December was inaugurated. A large single log considered to be a phallic idol was lit on fire and kept burning for 12 days. Animal or human sacrifices were offered in the fire on each of those days. Wild, delirious reveling accompanied the daily sacrifices as drunken participants defiantly strove to make contact with spirits. 1,000 miles away in pre-Christian Rome, celebrants were paying homage to their own gods during the winter solstice. Witchcraft traditions hold that a number of pagan gods were given birth during this period, including Dionysus, Attis, and Baal, chief male god of fertility and licentiousness. Another pagan god from Persia, identified as Mithra, was said to have been born specifically on December 25th. Mithra was the god of the unconquerable sun, the god of the light between heaven and earth, worshipped at that time by an influential Roman cult. His birth symbolized an end to the long nights and a return to the dominance of the sun. During the month-long winter solstice celebration, courts in Rome were closed. Any and all crimes were allowed. Homosexuality, cross-dressing, and uncontrolled debauchery reigned supreme. Rome's order was turned upside down. Even children were allowed to join in the drunken orgies as part of the Juvenalia celebration. By 270 AD, the Roman Emperor Aurelian had made it official, setting aside a 7-day period from December the 17th through the 24th, culminating in an exchange of gifts on December the 25th to celebrate the birth of the sun god. This Roman orgy to end all orgies later became known as Saturnalia, in honor of the god Saturn, the god of excess. Roman soldiers invading Britain brought with them their pagan orgiastic traditions. Upon taking root in England, Saturnalia became known as the Festival of Fools, reigned over by the Lord of Misrule. By the 4th century, the influential government-sanctioned Church of Rome, unable to outlaw the growing number of pagan practices, chose instead to adopt them into their so-called official Christianity. The Church believed this would attract more pagans to their fold.
They are vanity, and the work of errors. In the time of their visitation they shall perish. The portion of Yaakov is not like them, for he is the former of all things, and Yasharel is the rod of his inheritance. Ahayah Tsevaoth is his name. Gather up your wares out of the land, O inhabitant of the fortress. For thus says Ahayah, Behold, I will sling out the inhabitants of the land at this once, and will distress them, that they may find it so. YIRMEYAHU, Jeremiah 10:15-18, Cepher. And Ahayah said unto me, A conspiracy is found among the men of Yehudah, and among the inhabitants of Jerusalem. They are turned back to the iniquities of their forefathers, which refused to hear my words, and they went after other Elohim to serve them. The house of Yasharel and the house of Yehudah have broken my covenant which I made with their fathers. Therefore thus says Ahayah, Behold, I will bring evil upon them, which they shall not be able to escape, and though they shall cry unto me, I will not hearken unto them. Then shall the cities of Yehudah and inhabitants of Jerusalem go, and cry unto the Elohim unto whom they offer incense, but they shall not save them at all in the time of their trouble. For according to the number of your cities were your Elohim, O Yehudah, and according to the number of the streets of Jerusalem have ye set up altars to that shameful thing, even altars to burn incense unto Baal. Therefore pray not you for this people, neither lift up a cry or prayer for them, for I will not hear them in the time that they cry unto me for their trouble. YIRMEYAHU, Jeremiah 11:9-14, Cepher. They provoked him to jealousy with strange Elohim, with abominations provoked they him to anger. They sacrificed unto devils, not to Elohim whom they knew not, to new Elohim that came newly up, whom your fathers feared not. Of the rock that begat you are unmindful, and have forgotten all that formed you. And when Ahayah saw it, he abhorred them, because of the provoking of his sons and of his daughters. And he said, I will hide my face from them, I will see what their end shall be, for they are a very froward generation, children in whom is no faith. They have moved me to jealousy with that which is not El, they have provoked me to anger with their vanities, and I will move them to jealousy with those which are not a people. I will provoke them to anger with a foolish nation. DEVARIYM, Deuteronomy 32:16-21 Cepher. For it was your will to destroy by the hands of our fathers both those old inhabitants of your holy land, whom you hated for doing most odious works of witchcrafts and wicked sacrifices, and also those merciless murderers of children, and devourers of man's flesh, and the feasts of blood, with their priests out of the midst of their idolatrous crew, and the parents, that killed with their own hands souls destitute of help. CHOKMAH SHALOMAH, Wisdom of Solomon 12:3-6.
What does the word Easter
Cepher.
mean? It is certainly not a Christian word or name. What does this word Easter have to do with the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ? Easter, like all Christian holidays and festivals, has its origins in the Assyrian religion, and the word comes from the name of the ancient Assyrian mother goddess, Ishtar, who was also called Semiramis and Inanna. Ishtar is the female equal of Ashur, and at times Ishtar and Ashur are the same and equal in strength and in length, yet their distinction remains to the extent that Ashur is the sun and Ishtar the moon. Therefore, Easter is nothing more than Ishtar, one of the titles of Beltis, the Queen of Heaven, whose name, as pronounced by the people of Nineveh, with that now in common use. That name, as found by Henry Layard on the Assyrian monuments, is Ishtar, the moon goddess of love, fertility, and war. In Assyria, the spring festival of Akitu, celebrated around the spring equinox, lasted 12 days and ushered in the festival of Ishtar, celebrated on the first Sunday, after the first moon, after the vernal equinox. As the Akitu celebrates the resurrection of nature during springtime, the festival of Ishtar was the religious celebration of the fertility and pregnancy of the mother goddess, who bore them all, as well as the resurrection of her son, husband, Tammuz, the incarnated Son of God. The pre-Christian Assyrians at this time of year would be celebrating the increasing of the sun following the spring equinox. This is the time in which the amount of darkness and daylight are the same in duration. Following that day, the amount of daylight would steadily increase, a little each day. This increase of daylight in the spring brings about summer and makes crops thrive. thus the association with fertility, eggs, rabbits, etc. Hence the association is always to Sunday, to celebrate the increasing of the god of the sun on the Sunday. The Assyrian queen Semiramis, also called Ishtar, was known as the Queen of Heaven, and this Queen of Heaven is mentioned in the Bible, Jeremiah 7:18. Ishtar, which is pronounced Easter, was a day that commemorated the resurrection of one of their gods that they called Tammuz, who was believed to be the only begotten son of the moon goddess, Ishtar. This clearly indicates that the Assyrian trinity of Semiramis, Nimrod, and Ninos became the new trinity of Assyria, also known as Ishtar, Baal, also called Bel, Beluz, Peles, Pel and Beltes, and Nimrod and Tammuz. In other words, depending on the times in which we lived as ancient Assyrians, the Assyrian trinity was Semiramis, Nimrod, and Ninos, and later they refer to this trinity as Ishtar, Baal, and Tammuz. Tammuz is the Akkadian equivalent of the Sumerian Dumuzi, Inanna's husband. From the stories of the flood, which have been left to us by the ancient Assyrians, we find that in those ancient times, there was a man named Nimrod, who was the grandson of one of Noah's, Utnapishtim's sons named Ham. The story tells us that Ham had a son named Cush who married a woman named Semiramis, Zemir Amit meaning the branch bearer. Cush and Semiramis then had a son and named him Nimrod. When Nimrod died, he was resurrected as the son of God, Ninos. The Bible tells of this man, Nimrod, in Genesis 10:8-10 as follows. And Cush begat Nimrod, he began to be a mighty one in the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord, wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod the mighty hunter before the Lord. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, and Erech, and Akkad, and Calha in the land of Shinar. Nimrod became a god-man to the people in Semiramis. His wife became the powerful queen of ancient Assyria. Both were deified and became god and goddess, as in the Eastern tradition of deification of any king and queen, who represented God on earth. Nimrod was eventually killed by an enemy, and his body was cut in pieces and sent to various parts of his kingdom. Semiramis had all of the parts gathered and told the people that Nimrod had ascended to the sun and was now to be called Baal, the sun god. Queen Semiramis also proclaimed that Baal would be present on earth in the form of a flame, whether candle or lamp, when used in worship. Semiramis claimed that she was immaculately conceived. She taught that the moon was a goddess that went through a 28-day cycle and ovulated when full. She further claimed that she came down from the moon in a giant moon egg that fell into the Euphrates River. This was to have happened at the time of the first full moon after the spring equinox. In other words, not only God was conceived during the Akidu, but the mother goddess as well, and as we already stated in the article entitled Origins of Christmas, Akidu means building life on earth. Thus, it is the Assyrian religion who transfers divinity to earth, building a life for mankind in an earthly paradise. Semiramis became known as Ishtar, which is pronounced Easter, and her moon egg became known as Ishtar's egg. The egg became a symbol of fertility and life for the ancient Assyrians and spread throughout the world. The ancient Druids bore an egg as the sacred emblem of their order. In Greece, the egg was celebrated as part of the nocturnal ceremony consisting the consecration of Bacchus, the same as it was in Assyria for Ninos, Tammuz. The Hindu fables celebrate their mundane egg as of a golden color. The people of Japan make their sacred egg to have been brazen. In China, even today, dyed or painted eggs are symbols of sacred festivals. The Persians use dyed eggs as of one of the 7 symbols in the Nowruz celebration. Since the divine kings and queens of Assyria had to be conceived on the Akidu, the vernal equinox, or first day of spring, there was a waiting period, plus 1 week, for the conception to be fertilized. This period would confirm the fertility and pregnancy of the mother goddess. Thus, on the first day of the festival of Ishtar, the Assyrians hung dyed eggs from the temple walls, signifying the fertility of Ishtar. Similarly, in ancient times, eggs were used in religious rites of the Egyptians and were hung in their temples for mystic fertility purposes, as in the Assyrian tradition. From Egypt, these sacred eggs can be distinctly traced to the banks of the Euphrates. The classic poets are full of the fable of the mystic egg of Assyria, and thus its tales are told by Hyginus, the Egyptian, the learned keeper of the Palatine Library at Rome, in the time of Augustus, and writes, an egg of wondrous size is said to have fallen from heaven into the Euphrates. The fishes rolled it to the bank of the river, where the doves having settled upon it, and hatched it, out came Venus, who earlier was called the Assyrian goddess Semiramis, Ishtar. Hence, the egg became one of the symbols of the Assyrian goddess Semiramis, Ishtar, and Semiramis became known as the dove and her son Ninos. Tammuz became known as the son of the dove. This title transferred to Jesus as well, and Jesus became known as Bruna de Yona. The meaning of this mystic egg of Ishtar and one of its aspects had reference to the ark during the time of the flood, in which the whole human race were contained, as the chick is enclosed in the egg before it is hatched. Thus, the egg of the Euphrates is the ark of humanity, through which mankind is delivered to earth, through the mother goddess. The Assyrian name for egg is Betha, which is also the word for house. The egg floating on the waters that contained the world was the house floating on the waters of the deluge, with the elements of the new world contained in its bosom. The coming of the egg from heaven evidently refers to the preparation of the ark by express appointment of God, and the same thing is implied in the Egyptian version of the mundane egg, which was said to have come out of the mouth of God. The egg in Assyria was seen to be connected to the Assyrian goddess Ishtar, who bore them all, so the greatest blessing to the human race, which the ark contained in its bosom, was Ishtar, who was the great civilizer and benefactor of the world. Eggs, then, are an obvious symbol of birth and rebirth. In the eyes and mind of men, they seem to be a miraculous springing forth of life from a cold and dead object. Mithras, Persia; Tammuz, Assyria; Re, Egypt; Brahma, India; and Pianku, China, all were said to have been born from eggs. As Semiramis claimed to have not only been conceived by immaculate conception, she claimed that even her son, the Son of God, Ninos, was also conceived by immaculate conception. When Semiramis was deified, she began to be called Ishtar, and her son Ninos became known as Tammuz. The story of Ishtar is the same story as of Semiramis. Ishtar, like Semiramis, conceives on the spring equinox, and she proclaimed that it was the rays of the sun god Baal that caused her to conceive. The son that she brought forth was named Tammuz. Now Ninos became Tammuz. Tammuz was noted to be especially fond of rabbits, and they became sacred in the ancient religion, because rabbits represent fertility as well, and Tammuz was believed to be the son of the sun god, Baal. Tammuz, Ninos, like his supposed father, became a mighty hunter. The day came when Tammuz was killed by a wild pig on the summer solstice in the month of Tammuz. Queen Semiramis, Ishtar, told the people that Tammuz was now ascended to his father, Baal, and that the two of them would be with the worshippers in the sacred candle or lamp flame as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Semiramis, Ishtar, who was now worshipped as the Mother of God and Queen of Heaven, continued to build her mystery religion through the ancient fables. The queen told the worshippers that when Tammuz was killed by the wild pig, some of his blood fell on the stump of an evergreen tree, and the stump grew into a full new tree overnight. This made the evergreen tree sacred by the blood of Tammuz, which is why an evergreen was carried inside every Assyrian household on December 25th, on the winter solstice when the Son of God was born. And it is the same tradition we practice today during the Christmas season. She also proclaimed a 40-day period of time of sorrow each year prior to the anniversary of the death of Tammuz. During this time, no meat was to be eaten. Worshippers were to meditate upon the sacred mysteries of Baal and Tammuz, and to make the sign of the T in front of their hearts as they worshipped. They also ate sacred cakes with the marking of a T or cross on the top. Every year, on the first Sunday after the first full moon after the spring equinox, a celebration was made to honor the mother that bore the Son of God, and to commemorate the death, resurrection of her son, Ninos, Tammuz. It was Ishtar Sunday and was celebrated with rabbits and eggs, the way we do Easter Sunday today. Ishtar also proclaimed that because Tammuz was killed by a pig, that a pig must be served on that Sunday. Many families bake hams at Easter time, even today. Cakes bearing a cross-like symbol, representing the pair of bull horns on the moon goddess, Semiramis, Ishtar, were offered by ancient Assyrians on the Friday, Good Friday, before the festival of Ishtar, and were called Kaban. They have been mentioned in classic literature as early as the days of Cecrops, the founder of Athens, which was 1500 years before the Christian era. One species of sacred bread, says Bryant, which used to be offered to the gods, was of great antiquity, and called baun. Diogenes Laertius, speaking of this offering, describes the chief ingredients from which they were composed, saying, "They offered one of the sacred cakes called baun, which was made of fine flour and honey. The cakes which the Greeks offered to Astarte and other divinities were called baun, from which the word bun is derived." The so-called prophet Jeremiah takes notice of this kind of offering when he says, "The children gather wood, the fathers kindle the fire, and the women knead their dough to make cakes to the Queen of Heaven." The hot cross buns are no longer offered in Britain, but are eaten on the festival of Astarte. Jeremiah 44:19 confirms these Assyrian traditions, when he writes, "And when we burned incense to the Queen of Heaven, and poured out drink offerings unto her, did we make her cakes to worship her, and pour out drink offerings unto her." Since Semiramis, Ishtar declared the worship of Baal and Tammuz was to be done by light. The Assyrians celebrated their Easter festival with lamps and candles, paying tribute to the resurrected Son of God on Easter Sunday. This tradition carried into Catholicism, which is why the Madonna and Child are set up in a niche, and they must have a lamp to burn before them. And if Mass is to be celebrated, though in broad daylight, there must be wax candles lighted on the altar. If a grand procession is to be formed, it cannot be thorough and complete without lighted tapers to grace them. The use of these lamps and tapers comes from the same source as all the rest of the papal rites, Assyria, that which caused the heart, when it became an emblem of the incarnate Son to be represented as a heart on fire, required also that burning lamps and lighted candles should form a part of the worship of that Son. This tradition carried into Zoroastrian religion, as well as Egyptian. Every Egyptian on the same night was required to light a lamp in front of his house in the open air. This was an act of homage to the sun that had veiled its glory by enshrouding itself in a human form. When the Yazidis of Assyria, to this day, once a year celebrate their festival of burning lamps, that, too, is to the honor of Sheikh Shems, or the sun. Now, what on these high occasions was done on a grand scale was also done on a smaller scale, in the individual acts of worship to their God, by the lighting of lamps and tapers before the favorite divinity. In Babylon, this practice had been exceedingly prevalent, as we learn from the apocryphal writer of the Book of Baruch. They, he says, light up lamps to their gods, and that in greater numbers, too, than they do for themselves. In the Catholic Bible, if we look in the 6th chapter of Baruch, we will find confirmation that the pre-Christian Assyrian practice was to light lamps or candles before their deified kings and queens. I would venture to say that if you enter virtually any Catholic church, you will find statues of Mary, Jesus, or various saints that have candles lit before them, as in the Assyrian tradition. This practice has no Christian or Jewish origin. It is strictly Assyrian, and honors Asher, the sun and light of the world. What do we make of the Catholic blessing of the new fire on the evening before Easter Sunday, from which so many candles are lit? Is it not obvious that its origin is in the Assyrian god of fire and sun, whose emblem is a flaming heart, and whose titles are Baal or Tammuz? The blessing of the new fire is an adopted pre-Christian practice that honors the new strength of the sun as evidenced by the increasing daylight and lessening night after the spring equinox, and this has been plainly admitted by Catholics. In ancient times, fires were lit on top of mountains and had to be kindled from new fire, drawn from wood by friction. The fire was then used to bake cakes and sacrifice to Semiramis, the Queen of Heaven. This practice, along with burning incense, was used in conjunction with baking the cakes and is mentioned specifically in the Bible. 1 Kings 11-8, 2 Kings 17-7-16, 2 Kings 18-4, 2 Kings 23-4-15, Isaiah 17-8, Isaiah 27-9, Ezekiel 8-7-12, Jeremiah 7:16-19, Jeremiah 44:19-25. By now, the readers should have made the connection that the religions of the world are based on the ancient Assyrian religion, which has infiltrated the contemporary Christian churches, and further study indicates that the entire Roman Catholic system is based on the Assyrian belief system, most of all. The truth is that Easter has nothing whatsoever to do with the resurrection of Jesus Christ. We also know that Easter can be as much as 3 weeks away from the Passover, because the pre-Christian holiday is always set as the first Sunday after the first full moon, after the spring equinox. Some have wondered why the word Easter is in the King James Bible. It is because Acts chapter 12 tells us that it was the so-called evil King Herod who was planning to celebrate Easter and not the Christians. Passover and Easter sometimes coincide, but in some years they are a great distance apart. But the truth is that the 40 days of Lent, eggs, rabbits, hot cross buns, and the Easter ham have everything to do with the ancient Assyrian religion and nothing whatsoever to do with Christianity. These customs of Easter honor the resurrected Tammuz, the son of Baal, who is Asher reincarnated, and is still worshipped by the entire world as the rising sun, and his house is the house of the rising sun. How many churches have sunrise services on Easter's day and face the rising sun in the east? How many will use colored eggs and rabbit stories, as they did in ancient Assyria? Many religious practices originated in Assyria with Semiramis and Nimrod. Many names were used for this deified god and goddess as people scattered from Babel. Names for the mother goddess included Ishtar, Eostre, Cybele, Astarte, Ostra, Easter, wife of Baal, Ashtaroth, and queen of heaven. She was frequently worshipped as the goddess of fertility, a mother nature, goddess of spring, sexuality, and birth. She was also worshipped as a mediator between God and man. There are several sources of evidence of Ishtar and Tammuz worship in the Bible. Let us examine some of the quotes from the Tanakh where the people of Judah and Jerusalem still worshipped Ishtar as the Queen of Heaven even during Jeremiah's time. YIRMEYAHU 44:16-19. As for the word you have just spoken to us in the name of Adonai, we will not listen to you. 17. Instead, we will certainly continue to fulfill every word our mouths have spoken. We will offer incense to the Queen of Heaven and pour out drink offerings to her, as we have done, we and our ancestors, our kings and our leaders, in the cities of Yehuda and the streets of Yerushalayim. For then we had plenty of food, everything was fine, we didn't experience anything unpleasant. 18. But since we stopped offering to the Queen of Heaven and pouring out drink offerings to her, we have lacked everything, and we have been destroyed by sword and famine. 19. Are we the ones who offer incense to the Queen of Heaven? Do we pour out drink offerings to her? And did we make cakes marked with her image for her and pour out drink offerings to her without our husband's consent? The Bible is full of such tales about the worship of Semiramis, Ishtar, but she is mostly referred to as Queen of Heaven. In fact, the Bible tells us that even the people of Jerusalem, in Jeremiah's time and Ezekiel's time, worshipped Tammuz, as stated above, where both of these so-called prophets write about Jewish women weeping for Tammuz on the steps of the Jerusalem temple. In the same chapter, Ezekiel states, women wept for Ishtar's son, Tammuz. Did you ever wonder why Good Friday is recognized as the day Jesus died and Sunday as the day he arose, but yet had trouble explaining how he could thus be buried for 3 days and 3 nights? The answer is simple. He didn't actually die on Good Friday. The Assyrians offered cakes to Ishtar on the equivalent of the day we know as Good Friday. When the established church wanted to appease the ancient and pre-Christian people in order to convert them to Christianity, they moved the dates accordingly. Jesus was said to have actually died on the day of preparation of Passover week, which that year occurred on Wednesday. Thursday was the Sabbath of the Passover. Friday, Christ was still in the tomb. Said it was the regular Sabbath. Jesus is claimed to have risen after the Sabbath was concluded, which was the first day of the week, the day we know as Sunday. Moving the calendar is a trick practiced by most Christian churches. Pascha is most commonly translated as Passover, and of the 29 times this word appears in the New Testament, only on this one occasion is it translated as Easter. Today, Easter is by far the most commonly used term for the day of the resurrection. But would the disciples have recognized the term and used it in connection with the resurrection of Christ? The Feast of the Nativity of St. John is set down in the papal calendar for the 24th of June, or Midsummer Day. The very same period was equally memorable in the Assyrian calendar as that was the most celebrated festival of Tammuz. It was at midsummer or the summer solstice that the month called in Assyria by the name of Tammuz began, and on the first day, June 24th, was particularly designated as the Grand Festival of Tammuz. Centuries later, when the papacy sent its emissaries over to Europe, towards the end of the 6th century, to gather the pagans into its fold, this festival was found in high favor in many countries. What was to be done with it? They couldn't have waged war against the non-Christians, as this would have been contrary to the famous advice of Pope Gregory I, who declared that the Christians should meet the pagans halfway, and to bring them into the Roman Church. The Gregorian policy was carefully observed, and so Midsummer's Day, that had been hallowed by pre-Christians to the worship of Tammuz, was incorporated as a sacred festival in the Roman calendar. However, the question still remained as to what to call this festival after it was admitted into the Roman Church. To call it by its old name of Bel or Tammuz would have been too bold. To call Easter by the name of Christ was also not possible, inasmuch as there was nothing of the sort in the history of Jesus. The papacy decided to call it in the name of Christ's forerunner, John the Baptist. John the Baptist was claimed to have been born 6 months before Jesus. When therefore, the festival of the winter solstice had already been consecrated as the birth of the Savior, it followed, as a matter of course, that if his forerunner was to have a festival at all, his festival must be at this very season, for between the 24th of June and the 25th of December, that is, between the summer and the winter solstice, there are just 6 months. For the purpose of the papacy, nothing could be more opportune than this, to the extent that one of the many sacred names by which Tammuz was called, when he was resurrected, after being slain, was Ons. The name of John the Baptist, in the Old Language, was Joannes. To make the festival on the 24th of June suit Christians as well as pagans alike, all was needed was just to call it Joannes, and the Christians would think they are honoring John the Baptist, while the pagans were still worshipping their old savior, Ons or Tammuz. The worship of Bel, Tammuz, and Ishtar was very early introduced into Britain, along with the Druids, the priests of the groves. Some have imagined that the Druidical worship was first introduced by the Phoenicians, centuries before the Christian era, traded to the tin mines of Cornwall. However, the unequivocal traces of that worship are found in regions of the British Islands where the Phoenicians never penetrated, and which has left an indelible mark, which must have imprinted on the early British mind. From Bel, the 1st of May is still called Beltane in the British Almanac, and the English have customs still lingering to this day, among which prove how exactly the worship of Bel or Moloch had been observed even in the northern parts of the English islands. Every year on Beltane, the 1st of May, a number of British men and women gather at an ancient druidical circle of stones, near Crieff. They light a fire in the center, and each person puts a bit of oatcake in a bonnet. They all sit down and draw, blindfolded, a cake out of the bonnet. One piece has been previously blackened, and whoever gets that piece has to jump through the new fire and pay a forfeit. This is in fact part of the ancient worship of Baal. Baal and his consort Astarte were not only worshipped in Britain, but adored, and the April festivities of Easter are derived from the Assyrian ancient religion. European households at Easter fill their homes with lilies, which is the symbol of Asherah. Ishtar was frequently represented as a nude woman striding a lion, holding lilies with one hand and with the other hand holding a snake. Henry Layard found another sculpture of a nude Ishtar, minus the lion. She holds in one hand a bunch of lilies, and the other hand a group of snakes. The ancient Assyrians believed that wearing new garments on the festival of Ishtar is a symbol for renewing their life, and this tradition brings good luck throughout the year, which is why we dress ourselves and our children in new clothing on Easter.